My name is John Volkmer, and I worked myself sick to give my son the honeymoon of his dreams. I thought I was helping him start his new life, but instead, he left without even telling me, took someone else in my place, and came back like nothing happened. That betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever felt, but it wasn't the end of the story. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, you'll understand exactly why I couldn't let it slide. Let's begin. It was 8:13 p.m. in Phoenix when the text came through. Not a call, not even a voice message. Hope you're doing well, Dad. We're back from Bora Bora. Trip was amazing. My son's words lit up the phone screen like a flare in the dark, and then burned straight through my chest. I was standing at the counter in my kitchen, sleeves rolled up, sweat still clinging to my shirt from another double shift at the hardware store. The dinner I'd been too tired to eat sat untouched, cold. My knuckles ached from unloading pallets that morning, and my lower back throbbed with the kind of pain only men my age understand. The slow, grinding reminder that you've been pushing your body past its limits for far too long. But none of that hurt as much as reading those words. They had gone, without me knowing, without me even being told. Not a thank you, not a we're leaving, not a single word after all the hours I'd bled into that trip. My chest tightened as my mind replayed the last 6 months, clocking in before sunrise, taking every extra shift that came up, watching the numbers in my savings account crawl higher like they were climbing a cliff. Every dime meant for them, for his dream honeymoon, for the promise he'd made me. You'll be the first to know when we book it, Dad. You've done too much for me not to be a part of this, and yet, here I was, the first to find out after it was all over. The next thing I noticed was the photo attached. My son, grinning in a crisp white linen shirt, arm wrapped around his new bride. The ocean behind them was the color of turquoise glass, the kind you only see on postcards. I zoomed in. Her diamond ring caught the sunlight, sparkling like an insult, and there, in the reflection of her sunglasses, I could see the outline of another couple sitting with them at the table. Not me, not family, strangers. I set the phone down slowly, the way you do when you're holding something fragile that you secretly want to smash. My hands were steady, but inside, something had cracked wide open. He had no idea what I'd given up. The new truck I'd been saving for? Gone. The fishing trip my buddies had invited me on? Cancelled. Even the heating repair I desperately needed last winter. I'd patched it myself, shivering through cold nights so the money could go to him. And now I was just irrelevant. The sound of the fridge humming was the only thing in the room. My eyes landed on the envelope taped to the cabinet, the one I'd been adding to every week. Cash, in neat stacks, counted and recounted until it reached exactly what he'd said they needed. I had handed it over in April, trusting him, believing him. I pulled out a chair and sat down, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. My breathing slowed, and a thought began to take shape. Not sharp yet, but dangerous. A thought about the things people think they can get away with when they believe you're too old, too tired, too soft to fight back. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg for an explanation. That would only give him the satisfaction of seeing me wounded. No, I was going to do what I'd always done best. Work quietly, work smart, and make sure the lesson stuck so deep it couldn't be ignored. The question was how. How do you teach your own child that betrayal has a cost? That love isn't a bank account you can drain without consequence? I leaned back, closing my eyes, and in that moment, the memory came, clear as the Arizona sky on a winter morning, of the first time I realized my son had stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as a resource. It wasn't this trip. It wasn't sudden. It had been building, piece by piece, for years, and I'd let it. God help me, I'd let it happen. That's when I knew where to start, because this story, the one that ends with him learning what it means to lose something he takes for granted, didn't begin tonight. It began months ago, maybe even decades ago, back when I still believed that hard work and sacrifice could buy loyalty. And if I'm being honest, it started the day I told him I'd help pay for the honeymoon. I wasn't the kind of father who measured love in birthday cards or quick phone calls. I measured it in hours, hours spent at work, so my son could have more than I ever did. Hours spent fixing things so he never had to pay for repairs. Hours spent showing up, no matter how tired I was. I grew up in a two-room house on the outskirts of Tucson. My father worked the copper mines. My mother cleaned motels. We didn't have much, but we had rules. And one of them was simple. If family needed you, you showed up. Always. I swore I'd raise my boy with that same code. When Daniel was born, I was 28 and had just started at the hardware store. We didn't have much then either. Just a little stucco house in a quiet neighborhood in Phoenix. But I worked my way up, from stocking shelves to assistant manager, then to running the place when the owner was out. Every promotion meant longer hours, but it also meant a little more in the bank for Daniel's future. He was my only child, and I'll admit, maybe I spoiled him. He had a better bike than I ever dreamed of owning. He wore brand-name sneakers when my own shoes had duct tape holding the soles. I told myself I was just being a good dad. If I could give him the things I didn't have, maybe his life would be easier. And for a long time, it felt worth it. He was a bright kid, honor roll in middle school, captain of his soccer team in high school. I never missed a game, even if it meant going straight from the store still wearing my name tag. He'd spot me in the stands and wave. Back then, that wave was everything. But something shifted after he left for college. It wasn't sudden. Just little things at first. Calls that used to come every Sunday turned into quick text. Christmas visits felt rushed, like he was fitting me in between other plans. When I asked about his classes or his friends, the answers got shorter, like I was prying. I tried to brush it off. Kids grow up. They get busy. But the first real sting came the summer before his senior year. He called to ask for help with rent after his roommate bailed. I sent the money without hesitation. 2 weeks later, I saw photos on social media of him and his friends on a weekend trip to Las Vegas. I never mentioned it. I told myself there had to be a good reason. But a small voice in my head started whispering that maybe he saw me less as a father and more as a safety net. That voice got louder over the years. When he graduated, I helped him buy his first car. When it broke down, I paid for the repairs. When he got engaged, I covered part of the wedding costs, even though I was still making payments on my own mortgage. I told myself it was tradition, that helping your child start their life was what good parents did. Then came his fiancée, Claire. I wanted to like her. Lord knows I tried. But there was something in the way she looked at me, like I was a relic from a world she didn't want to be part of. She was polite, always with a smile, but her compliments had an edge to them. "It's sweet that you still live in the same house after all these years," she said once, glancing around my modest living room. Sweet, like I was a curiosity in a museum. The more I saw them together, the more I noticed Daniel picking up her way of talking. Little digs, disguised as jokes. "Dad, maybe you should get one of those smartphones that's not from the Stone Age," he'd laugh, glancing at Claire as if for approval. Or, "We'll take you out to that steakhouse you like when you're not in your uniform," meaning my work clothes. They probably thought I didn't notice, but I noticed. The first real crack in the illusion came during the wedding planning. They invited me to lunch to talk about expenses. I thought maybe they wanted advice. Instead, Daniel slid a folder across the table with a list of costs: flowers, catering, venue, and a column labeled Dad's Contribution. He didn't ask if I could afford it. He didn't even ask if I was willing. He just assumed. I should have pushed back, but I didn't. I told myself I was helping them start their life together, that I could make it work if I picked up a few more shifts. And when the wedding day came, I smiled through it all. The speeches that barely mentioned me, the way Claire's family seemed to avoid conversation, the fact that my seat at the reception was near the kitchen doors instead of the head table. Still, I convinced myself it was worth it. The sight of Daniel beaming at his bride, the knowledge that I'd done my part, that was supposed to be enough. Then, 2 months later, he called about the honeymoon. "We've been looking at Bora Bora," he said, voice casual, like it was just an idea. "But, we're a little short." "How short?" I asked. He named a number. It was more than I'd spent on my last car. I hesitated. That should have been my sign. But then he said, "You'd be the first to know when we book it, Dad. We want you to be part of this. I mean, not coming with us, obviously, but, you know, part of it." And like a fool, I said yes. I told myself I'd manage. I'd cut back, take the shifts nobody wanted, eat simpler meals, hold off on repairs around the house. I even turned down a chance to go deep-sea fishing with old friends, a trip I'd been looking forward to for years, just so I could save every dime. Week after week, I stuffed cash into that envelope in my kitchen cabinet, feeling a strange mix of pride and exhaustion. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if he really understood what it meant for me to do this. But by morning, I'd shoved the doubt aside. Until one night, I stopped by their apartment unannounced to drop off some paperwork Daniel needed for his car registration. Claire opened the door, surprise flickering across her face, before she let me in. Daniel wasn't home, but on the counter was a glossy travel brochure, Bora Bora, in bold letters, with a picture of the exact overwater bungalows he'd described. I picked it up. Claire's voice was just a shade too casual when she said, "Oh, we're just looking. Nothing's decided yet." I nodded, setting it back down, but something about the way she avoided my eyes told me there was more to it. That was the moment. Small, quick, almost forgettable, when the whisper in my head turned into a steady hum. Something wasn't right. It happened on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after I'd last seen them. I was closing up at the store when my phone buzzed with a notification. My old coworker Eddie had tagged me in a post. Eddie wasn't much for social media, so curiosity got the better of me. I pulled my reading glasses from my shirt pocket and opened the app. The photo hit me like a sucker punch. Daniel and Claire, standing on the deck of an overwater bungalow, the ocean stretching behind them in impossible shades of blue. Claire in a white sundress, Daniel shirtless with a lei around his neck, both holding cocktails like they'd just won the lottery. The caption read, "Best honeymoon ever. Memories for a lifetime. Bora Bora, Chachu just married." My stomach sank. This wasn't a planning stage. This wasn't, "We'll let you know when we book it." This was done. Over. A trip I had paid for, taken without a word to me. At first, I thought maybe they'd just forgotten to tell me before they left. It would still sting, but at least it would be a mistake. Then I scrolled down. There were videos, boomerangs of them clinking glasses, slow-motion shots of Claire diving into the water, a clip of them laughing with another couple over a candlelit dinner. And then, buried in the comments, I saw it. Claire's cousin had written, "We had the best time with you guys. So glad we could join you on this trip." I froze. That was the reflection I'd seen in Claire's sunglasses. They hadn't gone alone. They had brought someone else with them. Someone they deemed worthy of the space I had sacrificed to make possible. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't comment, didn't call, didn't message. I went home, put my phone face down, and sat in the dark for a long time. My chest felt heavy, like all the air had been siphoned out of the room. But the worst was still coming. The following Sunday, my church hosted its annual fundraiser dinner. I'd been attending the same parish for over 40 years. I'd helped build the new fellowship hall with my own 2 hands. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and word traveled fast. I walked in carrying 2 pies I'd baked that morning, feeling the familiar comfort of the room. The folding tables lined with casseroles, the hum of conversation, the clink of cutlery on plates. I was halfway to the dessert table when I heard it. "Oh, John, I didn't know your son was back already." It was Linda, one of the ushers, smiling at me over her shoulder. Before I could answer, she added, "Saw all those pictures from Bora Bora. What a trip." Claire looked like she was in one of those travel commercials. A few people nearby turned to listen. I forced a smile. Yeah. They seemed to have a good time. Good time? Looked like a dream. Another voice chimed in. Gary, one of the deacons. He must be so grateful to you. Everyone saying how generous you are? Didn't you pay for that whole thing? The heat rose in my face. Every head in that little circle was watching me now, waiting for me to nod and confirm that yes, I had bankrolled a tropical vacation for my son, one I wasn't even invited to know about. I swallowed hard. Well, you know, kids these days. They laughed politely and drifted back into their conversation, but I could feel the burn of their curiosity lingering in the air. In that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just betrayed. I was humiliated, publicly. When I got home that night, the envelope in the cabinet was gone. I'd given it to Daniel in April, sure, but I'd kept the habit of saving in that same spot. It was my rainy day stash, cash I'd been setting aside in case the truck finally gave out or the water heater quit for good. I had over $200 in there last I counted. I checked again, tearing through the cabinet, the pantry, even the drawer where I kept old receipts. Nothing. My gut twisted. I didn't want to believe it. But there was no one else who'd been in my house except Daniel and Claire. Just a week before they left for their trip, he'd borrowed my ladder, said they were hanging string lights on their patio. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bare patch of tape where the envelope had been. My breathing slowed, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. 2 days later, the final blow landed. I stopped by their apartment to drop off some mail that had come to my house. I could hear music through the door. Something upbeat, tropical. Claire opened it, barefoot, tanned, a silk robe tied loosely at her waist. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, John," she said lightly. "Daniel's in the shower. You can just leave that on the counter." I stepped inside, and my eyes went straight to the coffee table. There, scattered among souvenir mugs and seashells, was a stack of unopened envelopes. My handwriting on one of them. It was the thank you card I'd slipped into their mailbox after the wedding, telling them how proud I was, how much I loved them, how happy I was to help with the honeymoon. Untouched, unread. Something in me shifted then. Not a snap, not a burst of anger. Just a quiet, deep settling. Like a stone dropping into deep water. I set the mail down, nodded once, and left without another word. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent except for the ticking of the old clock in the hall. I thought about every hour I'd worked, every meal I'd skipped, every comfort I'd postponed so they could have their perfect trip. I thought about the laughter in those photos, the strangers sitting where I should have been, the missing envelope in my kitchen, the thank you card tossed aside like junk mail. And then I stopped thinking. I didn't toss or turn. I didn't rage or cry. I just lay there, very still, my hands folded on my chest, eyes open in the dark. By morning, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I didn't need to say it out loud. Some things don't require words. Revenge doesn't start with shouting. It starts in silence. The morning after my decision, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and my old file folder of paperwork, receipts, loan agreements, and a few documents most people would have thrown away years ago. One in particular caught my eye. The co-signed title for Daniel's car. He'd needed me for that signature 3 years ago, when the bank wouldn't approve him a loan. "Just for the paperwork, Dad," he'd said, assuring me he'd make every payment himself. And he had. Until I stepped in and covered 3 months last year when he was between jobs. The bank statements didn't lie. That car wasn't just his. It was ours on paper. I took a slow sip of coffee and opened my laptop. It didn't take much. A few clicks into my online banking, I canceled the automatic transfer that sent $150 from my account to his every month for the insurance difference he claimed he needed covered. It wasn't much money, but it was constant, and I knew Daniel had built his budget around it. Cutting it off without warning would sting, especially with the vacation glow still fading. That was just the warm-up. A week later, I stopped by the hardware store on my day off and ran into Jim, a buddy who'd been with me since the early days. We chatted for a bit before he mentioned something that made my ears perk up. "Hey, didn't your son's patio lights come from here? We just had a batch of those recalled. Faulty wiring. Management's telling us to track down buyers." I played dumb. "Oh, yeah? Dangerous, you think?" "Could be. They want everyone to stop using them until replacements come in." I nodded slowly. "Well, I might know where one of those sets ended up." That night, I gave Daniel a call. "Son," I said, keeping my voice casual, "you might want to take down those string lights for now. There's been some kind of recall. I'd hate for anything to happen." He sighed audibly. "Seriously, Dad? They're fine. Claire loves them." "Up to you," I replied. "Just thought you'd want to know. But if the HOA spots them, they might make you take them down anyway." Something about liability. That part wasn't entirely true, but Daniel hated dealing with his HOA, and I knew the idea of them breathing down his neck would itch at him. Sure enough, when I drove by their place 2 days later, the lights were gone. It was petty, small, but it was the first time in months I'd smiled without forcing it. Still, I needed something with more bite. That's when I remembered Daniel's job, a mid-level position at a real estate firm. He'd landed it through a connection of mine, an old friend named Martin, who owed me a favor. Martin liked Daniel well enough, but he liked me more. And I knew the firm was entering its busiest season. I stopped by Martin's office under the guise of catching up. Over coffee, I dropped a carefully placed line. "Hope Daniel's doing all right. He seemed distracted last time we talked. New marriage, big vacation. Lot on his plate." Martin's eyebrows rose slightly. "Vacation? Bora Bora," I said, letting the name sit in the air like a loaded word. "Beautiful, but pricey. I just hope he's keeping his head in the game at work. Wouldn't want anything slipping through the cracks." I didn't push further. I didn't need to. Martin was the kind of man who filled in the blanks himself. By the time I left, I knew the seed was planted. The first sign it was working came 3 days later. My phone buzzed while I was in the garage, changing the oil in my truck. It was Daniel. "Hey, Dad," he started, voice a little tight. "Just wondering if you'd said anything to Martin about me?" I wiped my hands on a rag. "Martin? Oh, we had coffee the other day. Why?" There was a pause. "No reason. Just, I think he's been watching me a little closer this week." I made a thoughtful noise. "Probably just the busy season. You know how it is." He didn't press, but I could hear the unease in his tone. That unease was worth more than any apology he'd never give me. My next move wasn't even intentional. It was opportunity knocking. I was at the bank paying a utility bill when I overheard a teller mention a new policy on joint accounts. Daniel still had his name linked to an old savings account of mine from when he was in college, an account I'd stopped using but never officially closed. Technically, either of us could withdraw from it. I'd kept a modest sum in there for emergency, but the idea of him thinking it was an available cushion suddenly didn't sit right. I asked the teller to remove his access. She printed a short form. I signed it. And just like that, another lifeline was gone. One he wouldn't even realize was missing until he reached for it. None of these moves were grand gestures. They weren't meant to be. They were the opening notes of a longer song, the kind you hum quietly while no one's paying attention. But little changes have a way of adding up. I started hearing it in his voice when he called. A subtle edge, like he was bracing himself for news he didn't want to hear. Claire stopped sending me the occasional text about family updates, and when I saw them at Sunday dinner a few weeks later, they seemed off. Daniel checked his phone constantly. Claire barely made eye contact. Good. That night, I went home, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and sat out on the back porch watching the sun dip below the Phoenix horizon. The air was warm, the sky bleeding from gold to deep purple. For the first time in months, I felt the weight in my chest lighten. That's when I remembered I still had something left. It didn't take long for Daniel to notice that something was changing. The phone calls got sharper. The smiles when we ran into each other felt forced. One afternoon, he stopped by unannounced, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the kitchen like he was taking inventory. "You've been acting different," he said finally. "Is something going on?" I shrugged. "Just busy. You know how it is." He studied me for a long moment, then gave a thin smile. "Claire thinks you're upset about the trip. You shouldn't be. It's not like we owed you every detail." I didn't rise to it. "Sure," I said, "if that's how you see it." That's when I knew the pushback was starting. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. At first glance, it looked like junk, but the return address was the HOA for Daniel's neighborhood. They were notifying me that, as co-signer and guarantor on Daniel's mortgage, something I'd done years back to help him qualify, I was being included in a review of shared responsibility over several unpaid fines. I stared at the page. This wasn't oversight. This was deliberate. The fines, $600 worth, were for petty violation: an unapproved paint color for patio furniture, a noise complaint during a backyard party, and improper trash bin storage, things the HOA normally handled with a slap on the wrist. And now, somehow, they were being tied to me. I called Daniel. "What's this about?" "Relax, Dad," he said breezily. "The HOA is just formal. They'll send you letters because your name's still on some stuff. But it's no big deal. I'm taking care of it." The thing was, I knew how HOAs worked, and I knew Daniel well enough to recognize the tone. He was hoping I'd panic and offer to cover it, just like I'd done with countless urgent expenses over the years. I didn't bite. A few days later, Martin called. "John, I thought you should know. Daniel's been saying some odd things around the office, making it sound like you're, losing track of things, forgetful, distracted." I sat in silence, letting the words sink in. Martin cleared his throat. "It's not my business, but it sounds like he's painting a picture, one where you're maybe not as sharp as you used to be." It was classic gaslighting, planting the idea that I was slipping, that maybe I wasn't capable of managing my own affairs. And if he was saying it at work, he could just as easily say it to the bank, to neighbors, to anyone who might listen. That's when I decided it was time to play a bigger card. I dug through my old file cabinet until I found the folder I'd been looking for. Volkmer Family Trust, Estate Deed. Years ago, before Daniel was even married, I'd purchased a small rental property on the outskirts of Phoenix. A fixer-upper, paid for in cash after a lucky investment in a friend's construction company. I'd rented it out ever since, keeping the income quiet. On paper, it was owned by a trust, not in my name, not in Daniel's. Only my lawyer and I knew the detail. The important part? The trust could be amended at any time, beneficiaries added, or removed. I made a call to my lawyer, Linda, a woman I'd known since she was fresh out of law school. "I need an amendment," I told her. "One that changes the primary beneficiary." She didn't ask why, just said, "Come in tomorrow. We'll get it done." While I was in Linda's office the next day, I asked her to do one more thing. "Draw up a revocation of power of attorney," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Does Daniel have POA over you?" "Not yet," I said. "But I think he's circling the idea. I want it on record that I haven't granted it, and I want it notarized." By the time I left, the trust's new primary beneficiary was my goddaughter, a sharp, kind young woman who'd been more of a daughter to me than Daniel had in years, and I had a signed statement preventing anyone from sliding their way into my legal affairs without my say-so. The next twist came quicker than I expected. That weekend, Daniel invited me over for a talk. Claire was there, perched on the couch with her phone in hand, scrolling like I wasn't worth looking at. Daniel offered me a drink, too cheerfully. "So," he began, "Claire and I have been talking. You're still in that old house all by yourself. Big place for just one person. We thought maybe you'd consider selling. You could move somewhere easier to manage, closer to us. I leaned back. And what would I do with the money? Daniel shrugged, feigning casualness. You could invest it. Or help us with a down payment on something bigger. Something for the future. The future. Their future. It was the same maneuver I'd seen him try a dozen times before, couching self-interest as help for me. But now, with what I had in motion, it almost made me laugh. I'll think about it, I said evenly. Claire's eyes flicked up from her phone then, sharp and assessing. I could see she didn't buy my neutral tone. That night, I called Martin. Do me a favor, I told him. Invite Daniel to that networking dinner next month. The one with the big investors. Martin hesitated. You want him to? Just invite him. And make sure I'm there. See, that dinner wasn't just a social event. It was where deals were floated, where reputations were cemented. I knew how to steer conversations, how to drop just enough truth to make people wonder. And Daniel? He'd try to play the big man, not realizing every word he spoke would be measured against mine. The night of the dinner, Daniel arrived in a tailored suit, shaking hands like he owned the room. I waited until the right moment, then joined a small circle where he was talking about future property plans and family assets. Speaking of property, I said lightly, funny thing about trusts, people think they know what's in them, but unless you're the trustee, I let the sentence trail off, smiling into my glass. A few of the investors glanced between us. Daniel forced a laugh. Yeah, well, Dad likes to keep some things to himself. That's because not everything is meant for just anyone, I said, still smiling. I could see it in his eyes, that flicker of uncertainty. That moment when he realized I had something he didn't control, something he couldn't touch. Later that night, as we were leaving, he caught up to me in the parking lot. What was that about? He demanded. What about? You know damn well. I met his gaze steadily. Daniel, there are things you don't know, and maybe that's for the best. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and finally just shook his head. I watched him walk away, shoulders tight, the first real crack in his confidence showing. In the quiet drive home, the city lights blurring past, I thought back to the years of bending over backwards for him, the unpaid bills I'd covered, the sacrifices I'd made, the trips I'd skipped. And now, here we were, standing on opposite sides of a line that couldn't be erased. The small moves were done. The bigger ones were in play, and this time, I wasn't going to stop. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Daniel's voice was unusually warm. Dad, great news. Claire and I finally found the perfect property. It's a bigger place, great neighborhood. We'll need to move fast, though. The bank says we've got a good shot if we can show some additional assets. Since your name's still tied to our current place, well, they said it'd help to have you in the meeting. Just formalities. He didn't say it outright, but I could hear it between the words. They wanted me there to sell myself as part of their leverage. And, knowing Daniel, he also expected me to offer a good faith sum to grease the deal. It was the same tone he used when he was a teenager, asking for money for gas before heading to the movies. Sure, let's do it. 2 days later, I walked into the bank's conference room. Daniel and Claire were already there, dressed like they'd stepped out of a real estate brochure. Her in a tailored navy dress, him in a sharp suit and new watch. The mortgage officer, a polished man named Victor, shook my hand with professional warmth. Daniel was in his element. Dad's been a huge part of our stability, he said, leaning back with a confident smile. Always been there to help us get where we need to go. Claire nodded, adding sweetly, we just want to make sure we keep everything in the family. I let them talk. I even let them gloat, because I wanted them comfortable, believing they had the upper hand. Victor turned to me. Mr. Volkmer, with your continued guarantee, we'd be able to extend a significantly larger loan, given your assets. Actually, I interrupted gently, there's been a change. Both Daniel and Claire's heads swiveled toward me. Victor paused. A change? I reached into my leather folder and pulled out 2 documents. As of last month, I'm no longer a guarantor on Daniel's current mortgage. The loan has been refinanced solely in his name. I slid the first document toward Victor. So my liability here is 0. Daniel blinked. Wait, what? And, I continued, ignoring him, I've also amended my trust. The primary beneficiary is no longer Daniel Volkmer. I slid the second document across the table, this one with Linda's neat signature at the bottom. Victor looked from the paper to Daniel, clearly aware this wasn't the meeting he'd expected. Claire's voice was sharp now. Why would you do that without telling us? I met her gaze calmly. Because I don't owe you that conversation. Daniel tried to recover, leaning forward. Dad, come on. You know we're building a future here. That house could have been... I held up a hand. Daniel, do you remember April? When I handed you that envelope full of cash for your honeymoon? He shifted uncomfortably. Of course. Do you remember what you told me? That I'd be the first to know when you booked it? He didn't answer. I kept my voice even. Instead, you took that money, went without a word, and brought someone else in my place. And when you came back, you didn't just ignore me, you took from my home, from my savings. Then you tried to make me believe I was losing my mind. Claire's face tightened. Daniel's jaw clenched. Victor cleared his throat, clearly wanting to vanish from the room. See, the thing about trust, I continued, is that once it's gone, it doesn't come back. And when someone shows you what they'll do for their own gain, you plan accordingly. I stood, gathering my papers. I've taken steps to make sure you can't use my name, my credit, or my assets ever again. The property you thought you'd inherit? It now belongs to someone who's treated me like family, without asking for anything in return. And as of last week, your mother's ring, the one you thought you'd keep, it's already been gifted to her. Daniel's voice rose. This is ridiculous. You're cutting us off over one trip? No, I said, finally meeting his eyes. I'm cutting you off because you taught me how little I matter to you. The silence after that was heavy. Victor pretended to shuffle papers, but the air was thick with something unspoken. The realization that the game was over. I walked to the door, then turned back for one final line. You thought I was your safety net. Turns out, I was the floor you've been standing on, and you just kicked it out from under yourself. Neither of them spoke as I left. The fallout was immediate. That evening, my phone lit up with messages from extended family. Daniel and Claire had already started spinning their version. But this time, I didn't stay quiet. I sent one group email, just one. I laid out the facts, the honeymoon, the missing envelope, the legal changes. No emotion, no embellishment, just the truth. And because I'd kept every receipt, every bank record, I attached them all. By morning, the silence from their side of the family was deafening. The final blow came a week later at a family barbecue, one I'd been invited to, but Daniel and Claire hadn't. Word had traveled. Cousins who'd once fawned over Claire now avoided mentioning her name. Aunts who'd doted on Daniel shook their heads when his absence was noted. Midway through the afternoon, Martin stopped by. You did the right thing, he said quietly. Some lessons can't be taught with kindness. I looked out across the yard at my goddaughter, laughing with her kids, wearing the ring that had been my wife's. It caught the sunlight, just like it used to on my wife's hand. And for the first time in months, I felt peace. In the weeks that followed, the noise around Daniel's version of the story died out faster than I expected. Family stopped calling to check in on his behalf. Old friends who'd once sung his praises kept their distance. Even his posts on social media, once flooded with likes and comments, began to look emptier. The honeymoon glow had faded, and the cracks were showing. Martin told me later that things at the office had shifted too. Your son's been distracted, he said delicately. Missed a couple of key calls. Forgot to follow up on a client. Nothing catastrophic yet, but people noticed. I didn't gloat. I didn't have to. Some consequences don't need help finding their way home. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch when Claire's car pulled up to the curb. She stayed in the driver's seat, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Daniel wasn't with her. She rolled down the window just enough to speak. "We didn't think you'd actually go through with it," she said flatly. "Cutting us out." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "And I didn't think you'd take from me without a word." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll regret this." I met her gaze, calm and steady. "No, Claire. I regret all the years I let it slide." She didn't reply. Just drove off, tires crunching on the gravel. It was the last time I saw her in person. The days felt lighter after that. I tended to the garden I'd been neglecting, fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door, and even said yes to that fishing trip I'd turned down months before. Out on the water, with the Arizona sun on my face and the smell of fresh catch in the air, I realized something. Revenge hadn't just been about teaching them a lesson. It had been about taking my life back. My goddaughter stopped by often, sometimes with her kids in tow. She'd bring over dinner and stories from her week, filling the house with laughter that had been missing for far too long. She never asked for anything, never hinted at wanting more than my company. When I handed her the keys to the rental property one evening, she cried. Not because of the money or the security it gave her, but because she knew it meant I trusted her with something I'd built from nothing. One Sunday, months later, I walked into church for the fundraiser dinner. The same folding tables, the same hum of conversation. Only this time, the people who greeted me weren't offering pitying smiles. They were offering genuine warmth. "Good to see you, John," Linda the usher said, patting my arm. "Missed you around here." Gary from the deacon board chuckled. "Heard you've been teaching folks a thing or two about boundaries." I smiled at that. Maybe I had. I never blocked Daniel's number. I figured if he ever wanted to talk, he'd have the chance, but the calls never came, and I stopped expecting them. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about the envelope in the cabinet, the one I'd kept feeding until it was full enough to pay for someone else's dream. I'd remember the look in Daniel's eyes when he realized I'd taken away the future he'd assumed was his. And I'd think about how easy it would have been to let it slide one more time, to give in, to keep the peace, to pretend it didn't matter. But it did matter. In the end, this wasn't about a trip, or even the money. It was about respect, the kind that can't be bought, the kind you either give freely or lose forever. People forget that aging doesn't mean losing your strength. It just means you've learned where to spend it. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is stop allowing people to use you like you'll be here forever. If Daniel ever figures that out, maybe there's hope for him yet. Until then, I sleep well at night, because I know the truth. In life, you teach people how to treat you. And if they refuse to learn, you teach them what it costs. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of my story. If you've ever faced something similar, a moment where family tested your trust or took your kindness for granted, I'd truly like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your stories matter, and someone out there might need to read them today. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Until we meet again, take care of yourselves, and never forget the value of your own worth.